screen there's a question to just share where you're joining us from and one thing you're curious about this evening. But my name's Daniel, and I'm just going to welcome you to this Rebuilders Program information and taster session. And um, yeah, just really glad that you've taken this time to join us this evening. I know it's been a lovely kind of summery day here in Birmingham where we are. And so we're just excited to share the first steps to sharing this really exciting opportunity that we've been putting together. And yeah, before we proceed, I just want to make you aware that this is being recorded for the purpose of sharing it with others who can't make it this evening. So we've already pressed record. If you don't want to appear on camera on the recording, then just keep your camera off, and we will stop the recording before we go into the questions and discussion section. So to share the agenda for the evening, if you want to go next slide, Charlie. We have put together the agenda for this evening, and yeah, for the first sort of half an hour, we're going to be doing introductions to the different partners that have come together to put this program together, and also the story behind where it's come from. And we'll share a little overview of what you can expect from the program in terms of the content that we'll be exploring, looking at our climate and social context uh, around this piece of this opportunity, and also kind of the approaches and opportunities that we might be able to identify at the neighborhood scale. We're going to look at what's possible on construction sites with materials and sort of the enabling infrastructure for organizing. And these are kind of taster topics that we will be exploring deeper in the program, but we just wanted to share a little bit about that this evening so you get a sense of what Rebuilders is all about. Then following on from that, we'll have a bit of time for a Q&A and discussion around any questions that you might have, and yeah, what you see might be possible after hearing what this is all about. So then also we'll share some of the practical things of what to expect, and if you decide to join, or we'll open up the space for any more questions around that too. So yeah, let's get into a little bit about the background to the program, where it's come from, and who's involved. I'm gonna go next slide. Yeah, so Regen Rebuilders is all about mapping out routes to regenerative constructions, and it's working with small to medium construction businesses in the West Midlands. And there's a range of partners involved in this program. So Civic Square, Dark Matter Labs, Faircroft College, Material Cultures, and it is supported and funded by Innovate UK. If you want to go to the next slide, Charlie, I'll give a little bit of a background to where this has come from. So Innovate UK, which is the government's kind of innovation agency, are bringing together like a collaboration of 6 further education colleges, and they call them these innovation hubs. There's within the West Midlands, there's like 6 colleges that are coming together, and they're focusing on providing sort of innovation support. They put it around sort of digital technology, but how they can train and support small to medium businesses in the West Midlands, and trialing new ways that colleges can support businesses to grow, and kind of some of the key focus growth sectors that they want to focus on. One of them is construction and the manufacture of future housing. So we have been working with Faircroft College, which is like a leading college in Birmingham that deals with adult education. And Faircroft are one of the 6 colleges that are involved in this initiative with Innovate UK. And Faircroft are really interested in doing this in a different way and looking at different ways to kind of educate small businesses and support them in their development and growth. And they'd also been following some of the work we've been doing at Civic Square, and the ways we've been nurturing ecosystems through learning experiences, hosting learning journeys over the past few years, and been particularly interested in the ways we've been doing research around climate transition and our research and practice at this at a neighborhood scale. And so they were keen to work with us to design a different way to approach working with small businesses in the West Midlands, and particularly in the construction sector, to see what could be possible when we look at this from a different angle. So we kind of started to approach this in the way that we do at Civic Square, bringing together different partners. And if you want to go to the next slide, Charlie. Yeah, and the next one. And so kind of the Rebuilders Learning Program was born from this. And what we're trying to do with Rebuilders is really bring together those among us who work in construction in the West Midlands, who want to move beyond like doing less harm through our construction practices and moving towards building in ways that regenerate and restore our planet, and look at building more resilience in our home streets and neighborhoods in the 21st century. And so we recognize this is a shift that's really needed in the built environment sector, moving from degenerating to regenerating. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see this visualization by someone called Bill Reed, who talks about shifting from sustainability to regeneration. And we know that in the kind of construction sector, there's a lot of talk about sustainability, and it's kind of in the middle of this visualization between what is degenerating and what is regenerating. The language that you'll see, this basically shows how degenerative ways of building require more energy to sustain, whereas when you move towards regenerative approaches, less energy is required. And so we'll be exploring some of this paradigm shift and this thinking through this program. But just to give you a little bit more background to it, you want to go to the next slide? Yeah, so we trying to position this as an opportunity for your business to also be able to expand your vision about what's possible with regenerative futures. And we'll be doing this through doing inspirational site visits across the country, holding skills boot camps and live building. We'll be doing some classroom-based workshops around material futures and how you can build more resilience in your organization to really navigate some of these things and get to grips with them. And another theme that we'll be also exploring is how we could work more with bio-based materials. So just to go into a bit more the structure of how we've put this together, I'm going to go next slide. It will start on the 8th of October 2024 with a residential, 2-day residential at Faircroft College. And then we'll have 4 hands-on skills boot camps and live building opportunities, one within the residential and 3 other dates. And then there'll be 5 learning visits to different sites, which we'll tell you more about later in this talk. And then alongside this, we're going to be hosting a range of mentors who are at the forefront of kind of regenerative practice in the construction sector, and you'll have opportunity to connect with these folks, and they'll be able to give you some maybe advice or ideas, or help you think about the future of your business. And also we'll be together creating an action plan for you that's bespoke to your organization. So that's the main overall structure of the building blocks of this. And so if you want to move to the next slide, Charlie. So Civic Square, we were invited in to kind of lead on bringing this together. So in this section now, we're going to give a little bit of an introduction to ourselves and the partners that are involved in this. But really, we want to know how we can find and work with rebuilders in the West Midlands who are really interested in this ambition to take things further, and recognizing that the knowledge and the technology is available to us now, and we just need to work together to look at different ways of approaching this. So Civic Square, just to give you an overview of who we are based in Birmingham, and we're working to build infrastructure that we need for the social, climate, ecological transitions at the neighborhood scale, and really looking at also things like the retrofit of our homes and streets and our neighborhoods. And at the heart of our work is this question: what if the climate and ecological transition and the deep retrofit of our home streets and neighborhoods were designed, owned, and governed by the people who live there? And so in this context of like this Rebuilders program, we're really interested in how regional small construction firms that are kind of hands-on in our neighborhoods and at a more local scale, what are the conditions that we need at this scale to grapple with what's needed to navigate these times in regards to climate transition. And so Rebuilders is an opportunity to explore that for us. But to give you a little bit more about how we're working more broadly, and so you can ask more questions about this later on, or if you come onto the program. We have kind of three what we call systems demonstrators that we work within. So the first one is the neighborhood public square, that we're working to build a physical site that is all about democratizing access to spaces, tools, resources, infrastructures that we all need in our neighborhoods to um, co-lead this transition that we speak about. And then the second demonstrator that we're working on is called the Neighborhood Donut, which is providing a compass to look at the look at the interconnected challenges that we're dealing with, and how we create the metrics and the goals, changing the goal of our economy on a local scale, and how we share our understanding of that is through this neighborhood donut work. And we use the framework of donut economics to design this at a neighborhood scale and do a lot of work to socialize this idea and this framework across all of the levels of our work. And then finally, we have the neighborhood transitions side of our work, which is all about looking at street-based systemic demonstration of the carbon, energy, ecological built environment transitions led by the neighborhood. So what that looks like is working with people in their streets, in where they live, to look at all these different strands of transition that need to happen at a kind of neighborhood and street scale. And there's many different ways we've been organizing around this, building movements, both locally and nationally, which we can share more about later on. But that's a little bit about us, and we've got kind of a track record of like doing these learning journeys. We're a multidisciplinary team that works at lots of different scales. And if you go to the next slide, Charlie, I'll just share a little bit about the learning journeys that we've done so far, just to give a little taste of what you can expect. So we've, for the last few years, done a range of different learning experiences that have been quite transformative with people in their places. So the first one that we did was working with people who are just exploring what alternative economic possibilities could be, through looking at the book Donor Economics and 21st century approaches to economics. And that was a learning journey that we held in 2022 across a range of different locations in the UK and abroad. About 120 different people were involved in that one. And then they kind of took action in their own neighborhoods and places to implement some of these ideas and explore them locally. We then also held a learning journey around ecological health in neighborhoods, which is really looking at the relationship between our health and our environments, and how we can look at health more holistically, and how it's interconnected with our ecology and nature and things like that. And that was a group of about 35 people from across the UK who joined that one. And then more recently, we have held Material Matters, which is an open learning journey, with workshops that we worked in collaboration with Material Cultures, who you'll hear more from later, to look at bio-based materials and how they can be used in construction and other aspects of our kind of lives. So yeah, Rebuilders, this program will be the first time we're working with the construction sector, so it's quite exciting for us for a number of reasons, but we wouldn't be able to do this without our key partners that are coming on board in this program now. So we're going to invite Dark Matter Labs to introduce themselves, and then after that, someone from Material Cultures to just share a little bit about you guys.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Jack Mincello. I work at Dark Matter Labs, and Emma is here as well. She's gonna talk a bit later, so maybe Emma, you can introduce yourself at that point. But yeah, Dark Matter Labs has obviously has worked with Civic Square for a long time. We're about 55 or so people around around the world. 10 or so of us based in the UK, and we've been going for about 10 years. We're a strategic design practice, and we try to focus on some of what in the kind of in the design theory is called dark matter, so the stuff that sits beneath or around or influences the physical world, but you can't see. So that's the governance design or finance and funding model design or organizational structure design, and how that meets with the tangible stuff that you can touch. And this is has a kind of long string which we relate to. This is a diagram which tries to sort of illustrate that from Alistair from Open Systems Lab, but we try and focus on the bottom half of that iceberg and find ways to make them feel to design. So this program in and of itself is a way for us to connect some of the kind of bottom half of this iceberg, if you like, with the top half, with trying to figure out what a good learning program design looks like in terms of the knowledge that we can share, how that knowledge can be consumed and used, and then our role really is to support some of that learning, documentation and exploration throughout the program. You can, if you jump forward, Charlie. And some of the examples of the bits of work that we looked at property value and land value around parks and ostensibly climate infrastructure in neighborhoods, and how that influences neighborhood design and urban design. If you jump to the next one, Charlie, and looking at the various pieces of a puzzle of a neighborhood retrofit strategy and bits of infrastructure, from the kind of social infrastructure to the physical infrastructure. What does it look like? How do we inform some of the demonstrator work that Daniel talked about? And yeah, if you jump to the next one. Yeah, most recently, and I think this is what led us here in a sense, was looking at climate risk extended out for the next few decades, and the current trajectory that we're on. There's a positive vision there that I think we're trying to shape, and how do we take theory and research in our practice and try and bring that and bring people on the journey of entering this world so that we can face it together. And that's us, I think. Thanks, Tony.
Great. And then Summer, would you be okay to give us just a quick intro to you guys in Material Cultures? Do you also want to share your screen for that?
Yes, hi everyone. I think it says someone else is sharing, and I can't share at the moment.
Should be able to now.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Summer, and I work at Material Cultures. I'm one of the directors. Can you see the brown pile of mud?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So yeah, we're a research and design organisation, and broadly speaking, our work is at the intersection of natural materials and low-embodied carbon construction. So we're architects, and through the work that we do, we look to advocate for reform of the materials we use in the built environment. So partly that's through the buildings we design, also the research work we do, and the education projects we get involved in. The way that we approach the materials that we use in the organization is kind of starting to think about waste streams that come from agriculture, actually. So we kind of see the potential for the relationship between agriculture and architecture to be reinvigorated as it was historically in different building practices. When we design buildings, we work as much as possible to integrate natural materials. And obviously that happens within a regulatory context. So we have lots of experience now of where they can't be applied and different ways that that's effective on a construction site. We often work with those materials in ways which is modular and employs prefabrication systems, predominantly to bring the costs of those buildings down for our clients, and also to make the process of making those buildings hopefully simpler and more efficient. Where we're engaging with existing buildings, we look to work with retrofit, so either stripping back materials or kind of introducing new ones, trying to understand how you bring bio-based materials into existing building fabric that may or may not be natural, kind of low embodied carbon in and of itself. The research that we do kind of pairs along with the design. So predominantly we're interested in figuring out where the materials we work with come from. And that means looking strategically at how those materials could be scaled up. So over the last few years, we've began to understand how the material supply chains work in the UK, and where bio-based material fabrication and manufacturing is already beginning to take place. I think, particularly in the context of this program, it'd be really interesting to be talking about how those materials and those ideas scale, and that's where we want to be taking our design work now. I'm thinking about larger scale building projects. And I guess relevant, hopefully, to what we'll be doing together in the kind of hands-on workshops, that the way we work in education, to think about the relationship of these different materials and how they're employed in construction practices, is to build and construct fragments at one-to-one. So like an on-site construction mock-up, and looking at the different junctions and details which become more complex in a building project, is how we start to resolve and address the building regulations and kind of the concerns of the fabricators and the contractors that we work with, and become a really kind of central mechanism for our design organization. And in the teaching work that we do, we sort of began in institutions, and I think over time we've moved closer and closer to like the factory or the construction site, and hopefully the construction college. So more of the work that we do as an organization now is at the platform, engaging in facilitating skills provision on construction sites. So either if we're doing a building which employs natural materials, we would run a workshop through that project, or independently of that, we work with skilled practitioners to run clay plastering or hempcrete building workshops, which are kind of open to different people to join. So I think I'm going to end there and hand back to you guys.
Great, thanks, Emma. And then, yeah, so I think, Jack, this is you or Emma, maybe?
I'm going to pass over to Emma.
Yeah, hi everyone. As Jack mentioned, I'm Emma, also a strategic designer at Dark Matter Labs, and I'll talk a bit about the bigger story of where this journey has come from, some of the context in which we view ourselves operating, and why we think this work and getting involved with the construction industry is urgent at this point. So we know that our current trajectory toward 2050 involves a few changes that we can anticipate from the growth of the UK population by about 7 million people by that point. The fact that about 80% of the buildings we will be living in at that point already exist. And meanwhile, as a nation, we are aiming towards net zero emissions by that time. If we could go to the next slide, please. And meanwhile, the current ways of building, as Daniel mentioned earlier, could be said to be sort of more degenerative than regenerative. And this comes across in a few key stats, ranging from the amount of emissions associated with our construction practices to the amount of waste produced by construction, and also the embodied carbon of our buildings. So we're really interested in trying to think about how we can change the status quo and what that would mean for people working in the built environment today. So this work, 3 Degree Neighborhoods, which has been mentioned a couple times by now, was something that we published earlier this year as a collaborative effort between us at Dark Matter Labs and Civic Square, and was trying to understand the current risks UK urban neighborhoods face in this century associated with the climate and ecological breakdown. So this piece of work produced a lot of ideas about how neighborhoods and communities can respond to the risks we might be facing. And at this point, we're interested in taking some of these ideas, putting them out into the world, and seeing where sort of concrete action can be seeded. And so if we could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. This work was based on existing research by climate experts, coupled with some work in design and futuring by our organization. So this is a sense of the palette of things we were looking at in undertaking 3 Degree Neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So what does a 3 Degree neighborhood mean? At the time of writing, the global mean surface temperature was 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and most climate scenarios today aim to keep us below a 1.5 degree change threshold. But we were looking at 3 degrees. Next slide, please. In order to point ourselves toward ambitious action, because current trajectory suggests that by 2100, we will in fact have broken a 3 degree climate change threshold. So people born today will be living in that future. That said, we are not embracing or accepting a 3 degree change. Instead, we're trying to think about how we can make efforts to structurally limit emissions to keep us below that level. In terms of what that actually means for people living in the UK, a 3 degree temperature change of global average surface temperature would mean that our summers in UK cities, including Birmingham, could be 8 degrees hotter on average. So it's a pretty drastic change. And next slide, please. What this looks like at a global scale is that a smaller and smaller proportion of the Earth's surface would be comfortably inhabitable or safe even for people to live in. So this is a snapshot at 2070, but we can link to a full animation showing how the range of habitable places would be shrinking over time. So heat is one of about 6 entangled risks that we looked at as a part of this work, along with drought, flooding, food shortage, climate migration, and the cost of living. So you'll see here that in addition to these sort of more straightforward measurable risks, there are also there's a strong layer of sort of the social entanglement. So today we're focusing on heat for the purposes of this presentation, but we couldn't isolate any one of these risks from all the others. Next slide, please. And it's also important to note that these risks are not evenly applied, and in fact, the poorest people and people of color are disproportionately impacted by extreme weather in England. And that's one among many indicators of the structural inequality that is completely entangled with the climate crisis. So as we said, by 2030 even, Birmingham summers will consistently exceed 40 degrees. And in terms of the distribution of that risk, if we could go to the next slide, please. Heat vulnerability across Birmingham which will involve hotter heat waves, more frequent heat events, and putting more and more people at risk, doesn't sit evenly over the city. The urban heating isolates some neighborhoods more than others. And it's important to note that this map loosely overlaps with other indicators of deprivation in the city. So some communities will be facing much more risk associated with heat and knock-on effects than others. And this is one of the reasons why we're interested in looking at the neighborhood scale along with our colleagues at Civic Square to think about how we can affect change from the neighborhood upwards. And at the global scale, sort of this idea of uneven distribution applies across historic emissions. So it could be said that on the basis of per capita carbon emissions since the time of the Industrial Revolution, higher emitting countries such as the UK and the USA have a higher responsibility to act. And this is part of the reason that we're so interested in bringing this work out into the world. So at the global scale, this uneven distribution of climate responsibility could be discussed through ideas like carbon budgets. But we're interested in finding new ways of talking about this at the scale of the neighborhood to think about what it would mean to take responsibility for emissions associated with the places that we live and the ways that we have lived over time. And so more or less, the point is that climate breakdown and global temperature rise are symptoms of a problem rather than the problem themselves. So as we've seen, the built environment is really mixed up in these issues. And this is part of the reason why we're interested in working with the construction sector to think about what this means for people working in the built environment. And I think I'm going to pass back over to Jack at this point.
Sure, thanks, Emma. So I think part of the program is really how do we connect these scales? And one of the most important diagrams I think we've referenced a lot is this idea of tunnel vision of carbon and this focus on carbon emissions and reducing carbon. It's very important, but it sits nested in a lot of other existing structural inequalities and is also driving like those inequalities further into the future. And so as we've seen, like the built environment, there's an urgency with which we need to kind of engage with here at a much more deeper level than just the carbon emissions of the buildings. Yeah, if you jump to the next. And the material consumption is a huge driver of biodiversity loss and water stress, and that will continue because green transition and how that's currently structured in terms of retrofitting, in terms of renewable energy, will demand a greater amount of materials than we're currently using. So some of the solutions are driving the problem even further. So how do we engage with that on a more structural level, and then figure out how we can test new things at the real local scale is the focus of this learning program really. If you jump to the next one. So in terms of how do we start to think about that at a building scale? If you look right at the top, the red figure there, this is a typical new build in terms of its carbon number. I mean, the number doesn't really matter, but what you notice there is the difference between that and a really low carbon home is quite a huge gap. And if we look at our carbon budgets, even to 2030, we need to reduce that by vast amounts. And so this can't just rely on the material side of things. It's also like, how do we work? How do we understand our networks of influence? How do we innovate into that future? How do we operate different socially in relation to our sort of technical efforts to reduce carbon and shift the construction sector in a certain way? And so that's, again, as Emma was saying, but just to reiterate, like that's how we want to bring to this program a little bit of that thinking of how do we think in terms of a neighborhood, its social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, and what it means to be an individual or to be an individual in an organization or a business that's running in the neighborhood with an eye on that future, rather than just through a kind of product or service lens. It's more about this, how do we bring in this wider picture of engaging with the wider context. So this was a little bit the drawings. These are all published online, and we can publish some links to these. But just looking at the kind of some of the interventions that might happen and the kind of co-benefits that stem from those, and just bringing that lens of saying, where do we draw these connections and how do they manifest at the very local street scale or neighborhood scale? So this one was looking at retrofit and densification as a core bit of transformation of the neighborhood. The next one, looking at regenerative resources, so not only materials but energy infrastructure and water infrastructure as well. Yeah, so Rebuilders is we've tried to bring that large sort of global context and bring it down into a learning program over the next 6 months. That is really what we're trying to do, is kind of join some of those dots, bring people into that conversation and into that kind of knowledge bank that we've built up so far, and then explore it further about what it means in real life. And so that's gonna be the sort of flavor and structure of the program itself, so that some of it will be about learning days, and the classroom time will focus on some of these things that we just talked about. Some of them will be about, okay, well, how have people been looking at this and building it already with site visits and learning around that, and then connecting to people who are already thinking about this and putting it into practice with mentorship and the kind of support system around thinking about your own business, or thinking about your own sort of professional journey as well. And if you jump to the next one, so there's some themes that we're working with in terms of the overall context. We want to look at materials and how they sit in the bioregion, which you've heard from Summer and a bit from Daniel up the front as well, and the networks and neighborhoods and Civic Square's role in that, and how it connects to the donor economics work. And then some of this thinking about co-benefits and how do we kind of link different transitions that we might see in the neighborhood, or even services that might happen in social infrastructures that might happen around that. And that'll be the sort of theme and flavor across the 6 months. And obviously then where then it meets the kind of practical learning and hands-on experience, which will obviously explore more of the materials and the processes and some of the supply chain and work around that as well. If you jump to the next one, Charlie. So yeah, it's maybe I hand back to either Daniel or Charlie.
Yeah, so I think Summer, if you're okay to share a little bit about the sort of building scale side of this now, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, just give me a sec to set this up again. Hello, same pile of mud again. Is that working?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I guess as practitioners, we work in the built environment. I think we work at the design and at the very difficult spectrum of making buildings come together. But because we're privileged to be able to carry out this research, one of the ways that we think we can address kind of the sort of vast set of kind of challenges that have been articulated already is starting very like prosaically with the materials we build with. So thinking about the kind of standard things that are used to put a building together and how they can be substituted for bio-based alternatives, essentially materials which are made with plants that sequester carbon, and in so doing, basically reducing the embodied carbon of the building and also making the environment of the space the building makes kind of healthier to live in and healthier to work on. So we'll be talking about not just the materials that we're looking to substitute, but also the kind of impact of the materials that are mainstreamed out, like on the environment around us. So I think part of the kind of curiosity we have and that we'd like to share is what the materials are made of, where they come from, and what the impact of making them is. So, you know, downstream in terms of pollutants, in terms of extraction, in terms of the kind of social impact of different forms of material fabrication. And I think the consideration there is not just like for the broader environment, it's also for the bodies of the people who work in putting buildings together. Lots of the materials that we work with today that are mainstream have different levels of toxicity that I guess are less well appreciated more widely in society. It obviously makes the labor of putting buildings together an incredibly dangerous thing in different ways. And when we kind of have that conversation around what materials we maybe could be exploring in the future, we're also interested, obviously, in thinking very technically about how they can be applied in new builds and retrofit applications in ways that meet the regulatory system that we operate in. I think there's lots of really kind of exciting and innovative material work out there, lots of new bio-based materials, and actually quite a lot of traditional ones that we know used to work really well, things like thatch and other vernacular techniques. But I guess the focus of our conversation really is what's practically available now that we could apply within the building industry today, like what change is accessible to us that we can begin to employ. And kind of the next step, I think, and maybe it's a kind of secondary consideration, but I think it's also important, is the way those materials are applied, and that they are and can be very beautiful, and that there's different ways of employing them, kind of whether those materials are embedded and kind of concealed within a structure, or that they're expressed. And I think in that there's lots of opportunity for new skills to be learned, and the kind of repertoire of techniques and kind of green resilient skills that are available within your organization to grow. It's an undeniable factor, I think, when we're talking about these materials, that there is cost associated with changing the way we work. And it's because the whole industry that we operate within is very kind of inert and slow to transition. One of the ways that we talk about addressing this is through techniques of prefabrication. There are kind of modern methods of construction that are scaling up. We think there are lots of opportunity for things like SIPS panels to be made with bio-based materials, just as they can be made with polyurethane. It's really all about technique and skill, and those are things which are very accessible to people who work in industry. We've got quite a lot of experience now in building with and implementing modular bio-based systems, and when we do this as designers, we look to generate building typologies which are replicable. So thinking about how a building in one place could be deployed in another, and as much as that enables us to think about economies of scale and kind of broadly speaking, bringing the cost of these materials down. And I guess in the context of the program, very specifically, we're thinking maybe about how the building site, the construction college, and our space together in conversation becomes a kind of a place of learning. And I think we're really interested in a dialogue around how these skills and these opportunities for organizations like yours and for you can begin to grow and to scale. What we do in practice is we use building sites as ways to bring other people along with us. So whether that's members of the community or the contractors that we work with and the kind of different SMEs whose skills we rely very heavily on. Essentially, this program is about extending the skills available within the built environment industry, and to make the work that you already do climate resilient in the future, to really think practically what it is when people talk about green skills and green jobs. What do we mean, and how do they begin to tangibly impact the work that you do on a building site? And also, I think to think maybe differently in the future in the context of the neighborhood scale work that's been described about how buildings can come together. You know, are there different layers that have of responsibility, where you have kind of shell and core delivery from contractors and some of the fitting and finishing and fit out either from a subcontractor or maybe in the future from a community within the kind of neighborhood scale. That's kind of the work that we've been doing, and like looking to how you empower communities to finish the buildings themselves, but also more broadly, how do we make what are conceived of as being traditional or heritage skills mainstream? Things like lime plastering, for example. And through the work that we've been doing recently, we've been kind of visiting and consulting with lots of construction skills colleges and providers. And I think part of what we'd like to be doing with this program and talking to you about broadly is how we grow the demand for these different materials to the extent that the skills provision in construction colleges and schools can begin to be impacted. And I think actually in reality, the place really for that to happen is within the businesses, within the people who are doing the work on construction sites. And that dialogue is something that we're really interested in having with you, because ultimately we think there's a kind of an extraordinary opportunity for change. And so I think I said this already, but whilst there is a kind of spectrum of really exciting and maybe a little bit more kind of niche and innovative building materials that are bio-based, that are not yet regulated, not yet tested and certified, there's actually loads that are ready to kind of roll in industry, and you can buy them from local material suppliers and different building merchants. And so actually to some extent, we're going to be looking at how those different systems come together, thinking about ones which already have traction in industry and that traction is looking to grow. And also how skills which maybe we think will have resilience in the future because they'll grow in popularity could begin to be embedded in the organization. And these are at the moment considered to be, I'd say, quite high-end niche things, maybe clay plastering or lime work, but also modular systems that work with very low-cost materials like straw or wood fiber. And so in the course of the program, we'll be leading us together through a series of kind of skills workshops, working ultimately towards the production of a building fragment, not exactly like this one. This is one we made earlier. And as I said, maybe using materials which are a little bit more mainstream and have more kind of relevance in your average construction project today and the MEEC in the UK. But as core of these skills workshops, we'll be working with certified installers who have experience in natural building materials, so giving you opportunity to kind of, I guess, interrogate them about the pragmatism of the materials they work with and how they employ them. And we're looking really at materials which have a kind of direct role of substitution in conventional building fabrics, so that we kind of start with the ones that we kind of have to hand already. So I'm gonna wrap up there. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Salma. I'll pass it over to you, Emmy.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Emmy from Civic Square, and I just wanted to kind of pull together before passing over to the second half of this, which is going to tell you even more about why we're doing this and some of what it's going to look like practically as a program. Is to say that, like, we all in many different ways have quite a self-interest in doing this work, right? Like a lot of the sites that are part of the program that you're going to go and visit are projects that are trying to, like us, at a neighborhood scale, bring the global complexities and ideas that Jack and Emma talked about, particularly in 3 Degrees, into practice. Daniel talked about the types of demonstrators we work on, particularly street-based retrofit and the public square that we're building. And that focus is really about being able to make things with people at the scale of the neighborhood that are tangible demonstrations that you can touch, see, feel, experience, that grows the skills and the capacities and the imagination of both the place, the people involved, and all of the ecosystem of people who are part of that. And in that, as Summer said, the incredibly important skills of contractors, construction workers are often so needed and so important to that. And particularly to give you a bit of an insight into why Civic Square really jumped at the chance at working with Fircroft College on this, is because of Fircroft's long and radical history in democratizing education to those who are really marginalized from it all through history, and to really center what it means for those with loads of different lived experiences to be at the heart of growing our collective capacity and possibility for change. And in our context, we have this huge capital project that we're going to be building. We work with many partners doing work across street-based retrofit, around building community infrastructure, around thinking how to revitalize old buildings, how to practically grow skills and capacities for the climate transition locally. And so for us, it also really matters that we can grow the and learn more about the incredible practice that is already happening in the region, but also help to grow that. And so we want to work alongside a whole group of people to really think about where we can point to and seek collaboration and work with on some of these huge projects that are coming ahead. And all over the country, there are, as Daniel mentioned, people doing this work. Some of the mentors will include people like Jonathan Smales working in Lewis on the Phoenix Project, which is one of the most interesting new developments happening, to people who've been working in bio-based architecture and ideas around that, like Michael Paulin and many others. And so why that really matters to us is that we really want to grow the capacity and imagination here in the West Midlands, but also we want to have people to work with when we have a construction tender who have really thought about the expansive nature of the challenges ahead, but also the possibilities that could happen in working in this way. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we talk a bit about the site visits and why we've chosen them alongside Kavitha. So for us, and Daniel will talk about this at the end as well, it's really important that you're also able to say to us, hey, there's incredible people working on this in the region or broader that we can connect to and also learn from. It's not just a one-way interaction. So yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about that, but particularly I wanted to just build as well on what Summer said, in terms of really being able to see how much more we can expand the possibility of sites as active classrooms for this, for learning about all the points in the construction process where communities can get hands-on, where they can finish, where they can learn new skills, where they can build capacities and knowledge. And in our recent learning journey with Material Cultures, that's been so evident as we've worked with community groups all over the country who are running projects, doing retrofit, building community infrastructure. And so it's important to say that Civic Square really jumped on this opportunity because we know there are so many opportunities coming ahead in our work, but also that we're often asked who's doing the best work in this space. And we want to be able to really have a city and a region that is showcasing some of the best urban practice in this, and it isn't just a story for rural places where it's easier to start doing this work. And again, as we said, when we get to some of the visits, you'll see that some of the construction colleges and the possibilities that are already here are like already showing that direction in amazing ways. So I'm going to hand over to Charlie to sort of wrap up a bit more of the like big picture, and then we'll get into some practical details about the program.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So in the spirit of thinking about how we want to be sort of working alongside each other, rather than this being a kind of really separate participant host type relationship, I think one of the reasons why that framing of this as people working alongside one another is so important is if we think about how uncommon a lot of this is. So how unusual it is to see a building today assembled with bio-based materials, just how unusual it is to see a building that is assembled according to primarily social or ecological value rather than cost or profit, for example. And, you know, it's important to acknowledge and name that these things are not the norm right now, because that then gives us an extra sort of dimension to this work where we understand that a really crucial aspect of what we're trying to do is shift the Overton window. And if you're not familiar with the concept, the Overton window is essentially a kind of metaphor that helps us think about what is viewed as sort of possible. This could be at the scale of an organization, or it could be at the scale of an entire national economy. So we are really interested in ways that we can, both as Civic Square and as a sort of wider ecosystem of organizations and peers, we're really interested in how we can contribute to shifting the Overton window so that work like what we've been describing today can become less unthinkable and more incorporated into sort of policy and standard practices. And one way that we kind of visualize this process is using visuals like the two loops model, which kind of frames systems change as two loops where you can kind of see the limitations and the decline of an incumbent system, and then almost coordinate the emergence and creation of new methods, new practices, and new systems to take the place of the old. And so what we are really trying to do, both in terms of what we want to build in our neighborhood, but also in terms of what we want to achieve on this program, is we really want to be sort of sitting at this stage of building and evidencing the need for emergent systems or emergent practices in construction. So as we know that materials like concrete, petrochemically derived materials become less and less tenable and feasible, what are the alternatives to these? What are the regenerative practices that can step in to fulfill new housing typologies and approaches to things like retrofit that we know are going to be already are and are going to be so important. And again, this is connected to the previous image, but we think it's really helpful just as, again, a way of visualizing how we're trying to contribute to these larger processes of change. So while our program may be a sort of small collection of SMEs, for example, in a very specific region like the West Midlands, what can be demonstrated here and what skills we can try and socialize and what transitions we can try and work towards in construction here are things that can cascade and spiral out and eventually lead to tipping points in these systems. And so one kind of piece of language that you will probably hear several times throughout this program is that of demonstration, of systems demonstration. And when when you've heard about our work like the Neighborhood Public Square, when you've heard about neighborhood transitions, these are ways that we're trying to create systems demonstrators to show almost models, tangible vehicles of what could be created elsewhere, what could become more normal. And a really sort of instructive and foundational case study in this for us is actually the creation of the NHS. So if you didn't know, the NHS, if you kind of trace its history all the way back, it finds its sort of intellectual origins in a Welsh town called Tredegar. And this town had a lot of people who were mining, And they made the observation at a sort of community neighborhood scale that there were a lot of shared health conditions, and that the individualized private approach to healthcare and to health was not really serving their community in the way that it could do best. So they established something called the Tredegar Medical Aid Society, which was essentially a sort of microcosm or a demonstrator of public healthcare, where everyone in the community paid 2 pence into this system regularly, and for that they got a neighborhood community scale public healthcare system. And when the NHS was eventually introduced at the level of national policy, it was founded by Nye Bevan, who grew up in Tredegar. And you can actually find a quote from Nye Bevan where he talks about all we're doing with the NHS is bringing to the rest of the country what we had in Tredegar. So this for us is a really great encapsulation of why we think working at the neighborhood scale is so important, because you can kind of co-build, organize, and demonstrate things at this scale that are not answers in of themselves, but are very much integral sort of stepping stones and tipping points towards those larger processes of systems change. And another thing that is really crucial in this process for us is trying to view our role as Civic Square as providing a kind of infrastructure in this process of wider systems change. So we see that both in projects like the Neighborhood Public Square, where we're not just thinking about building a space for the sake of building a space. We're thinking about how can our site enable wider neighborhood retrofit. If we know we're going to need to move towards more biomaterial production, how can a microfactory process natural materials in a way that allows surrounding buildings and neighborhoods to incorporate them into retrofit projects? How can we create spaces for neighbors to come together and make these democratic decisions at a hyperlocal scale? So not just seeing these things as kind of separate solutions, but as types of networks and infrastructures that can support and create feedback loops with these wider processes of change. And so this is, like I said, one kind of aspect of that for us, which I think we've already shown you, but this is a sort of early vision for the Neighborhood Public Square. And this is the type of demonstrator work. This is the type of direction for construction practices that we want to be able to sort of move towards alongside the people who join us in this program. And as Amy said, we really jumped at the opportunity to host this because we know that to reach those tipping points and to have these larger ripples that will influence systems, we really need to be finding everyone else who's in the position to do this work alongside us. And I think it's really important to, acknowledge that this is something that you can observe in many different ways through many different types of language throughout the UK and throughout different steps of the industry. So one project which will hopefully be one of the sites we go and visit, the Enterprise Center, you can see how in this case it wasn't a simple matter of people learning bio-based material skills. It wasn't even a simple matter of people learning traditional methods that may be starting to be lost or reviving those traditional methods, but they also identified ways that these methods could be incorporated through modern methods of construction, both to make these projects more feasible in ways that Summer already described, but also have a kind of reciprocal relationship with the supply chains themselves. So the Enterprise Center, for example, made an enormous contribution to local thatching because they co-developed alongside Thatchers a modular process where the thatching could be conducted all year round rather than just seasonally, which is the traditional method. So to land all of this in the program, we really want to support participants, the SMEs that are going to be joining this in almost visioning and strategizing how they might want to not only change or transform their own practices or organizational design, but also think about how these changes can extend out beyond the bounds of their organization and interface with wider industry or the economy as a whole. And a few kind of key aspects of the program that we're hoping will enable that is we're going to be facilitating learning logs throughout the entire program so that everything is thoroughly documented and isn't kind of just being lost through the pace of the program. We're going to be supporting participants in developing action plans so that they can actually kind of unpack alongside us and mentors what are the best ways to incorporate some of these learnings or ideas or opportunities. And then obviously a really enormous opportunity and aspect of this will be the engagement with the mentors that we'll be assembling, people who in multiple different places and through many different methods have identified positions where they're able to kind of contribute to some of these ideas around regenerative design or construction or at these sorts of positions in the built environment. So these kinds of connections with mentors will also be something that we hope is enormously generative. And then another really great aspect of this, I kind of foreshadowed this already, but will be the actual precedent visits where we get to go and see that these aren't just ideas, these aren't just hypotheses, these are actually things that are happening out in the world and can be seen, felt, touched. So I'll pass over to Kavita to talk a little bit about some of the sites that we're hoping to actually go and see throughout this program.
Thanks, Charlie. And yeah, hi everyone, my name is Kavita. I know that I'm like late to introducing myself, but it's really nice that you've all joined us for this evening. And thanks for bearing with us while there's so much information for us to share. When we're talking about some of these site visits, I think one thing that we are really excited about is just how much that these are entry points into seeing how those wider system stories of like the beyond carbon story becomes something that is really seen through these construction projects. And these are some examples that can really throw open the doors of possibility and hopefully spark some inspiration for you. And that's really the intention there. So we'll be joining with people that work in these spaces and sharing the story of how they were built. What was their thought processes? What were the things that helped unlock them to be incredible precedents that they are? And what are the things that are really key takeaway points so that people can start building on these learnings in really generative ways. So yeah, the first visit that we're hoping to take is down to We Can Make in Bristol. We Can Make describe themselves as a people-led response to the housing crisis. They're a community land trust that are creating affordable homes on microsites, such as back gardens, and they have a system in which they are taking homegrown timber and turning that into small homes. And they've actually got a report that I'm just sharing in the chat now called Homegrown Homes. And that's going to be one of the very first visits, and we'll hear all about their incredible work. We can go to the next one, please, Charlie. The Ubeda Initiative down in Wolves Lane. Imi knows this one a lot better than I do, so I'll offer Imi to explain briefly what they do.
Thanks so much. So Abele has been at the forefront of Black-led organising in South London for a number of years. Like We Can Make, they've been doing research as well as propositions for the wider story that Jack mentioned around land, around housing, and they run a site in Wolves Lane in Wood Green, which is a home to loads and loads of different work across London, from Black-led growing to a range of cultural and community projects. Most recently, they've been expanding and constructing on their site into 3 brand new buildings. Material Cultures are actually one of the architects who've worked on that site, and they have been also involving local people in as many ways as possible in the construction process. Again, like Kavitha said, every project has construction, building, housing, or retrofit at the heart of it, but there's loads of other innovations happening at the same time. So at Abele, they talk quite significantly about how much the construction tender was a huge part of finding the right partner to be able to involve and move gently around the health and safety of having community on site and helping to build and learn and help finish and construct parts of the building. And so from this project, you're probably quite likely to have a very beautiful day, because the growing food for everyone from Ottolenghi to local cafes on their site. But you'll also get to see hands-on 3 buildings that are in the middle of the construction process, meet the founders of the project, meet the architects, meet the construction companies involved, as well as hopefully perhaps getting a chance to get hands-on and helping them to do certain parts. So yeah, that's it for Abele. I'll go back to you, Kavitha.
Thanks. Yeah, the next one we've got is the Jericho Woodshack in Birmingham, and they are a CIC and charity.
Oops, I think Kavitha might have frozen. Until she comes back, I will carry on from where she finished off. So Jericho,
they basically are a materials home, and they also have a scheme in which they're upskilling people. Oh, sorry, I don't know if my internet connection danced a bit, but yeah, they basically upskill people as well, and help people that need it to get new skills that they might need to be able to join different parts of the built environment sector, training them to the point that they're certified, and they're in that way they're a social enterprise that has won some awards for their social interventions. We've been there before, and we've had a workshop there, and it's been amazing. And this is a really great opportunity to see what sites that are doing this kind of work can start creating a different type of infrastructure that enables other people to reuse materials that are low carbon, that are repurposed, that often are discarded, and taking waste and turning that into something that can offer new life in the built environment and construction sector as well. So yeah, that's another one. Charlie, we can go ahead. I think this is Simi as well.
I'm going to actually do a little tiny pivot to Summer as well, because Summer also knows about the James Cond Centre. So as I mentioned before, like, we aren't trying to only go and visit one type of project. We're trying to visit lots of different parts and different approaches, from things that come from a much larger perspective to smaller social enterprises, as well as different construction colleges and spaces in the city that are already doing really interesting work. And we discovered the James Cond Centre through our work with Material Cultures and the report that we'll tell you about at the end as well. But Summer, I was just wondering if you could give a little bit more of a personal touch to explain the work of James Cond.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Amy. So the James Cond Centre is the Sustainable Construction College associated with the UCB, so University College in they teach sustainable construction skills to the best of their ability within the accreditation curriculum, which operates today in the UK for people doing apprenticeship programs and NVQ skills training. But they've also taken an active choice in the retrofit of the building to do it sustainably and as sustainably as they can, and to make sure that students who occupy the building and are going there to study and to learn new building skills and trades can see how the building was put together. So, I mean, you can kind of see in this image, it's kind of a kind of skeletal retrofit, but it means that you can see the way that the wiring is done and the plumbing. And I think also just that the general kind of ambition for the students and for the program, and the goodwill that the education staff there have for the students who come through the doors is really extraordinary. And we hope it will be a great place to visit, and also potentially a great place for us to be exploring some of our kind of skills days together.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm super we're like just clocked the time, and there's a few things that we were hoping to get through as well, so I'll just briefly explain the last few, but we can always send a lot more information out via email when we share the recording and when you guys get the slide decks as well. So there's more information that we can share about these visits. But yeah, the Enterprise Centre in Norwich is another one. It's an amazing building, new build that was built to Passive House, and I think it was BREEAM like outstanding rating. And then the next one, please, Charlie. Down to Earth project is also an amazing project down in Swansea, which is in South Wales, and we'll be visiting them in March. And can we go to the next one, please, as well? The Portland Inn project up on Stoke-on-Trent. They're amazing contractors that they have on this project, where they're turning an old pub into a community arts centre, and they're doing this in the most incredible participatory ways. Next one, please, Charlie. Thank you. And the Centre for Alternative Technology is somewhere that we've been continuously inspired by as a place that has kind of shown incredible possibility and thrown many doors open to how the built environment can function, and how we can start sharing and open sourcing learning as well. Thanks, Charlie. I think we can go to the next one. I'm aware that we have quite a lot of things that we still want to consolidate, and there's been so much information that we've shared, and we haven't really left loads of time, unfortunately, to chat about some of the things that you might have to go over. So we have some questions that we wanted to ask, but I think I'll quickly go over the key asks and last bits of final information, and then maybe we can also share some of these questions in the chat, and people can mull them over. And if you have any questions, by all means, continue to ask them. So yeah, I'll copy and paste those into the chat now. But yeah, some key practical information is that we are asking for an element of commitment throughout this learning program. And just to be really clear, the key parts of the commitments that we're asking from are to be able to come to these dates, where we'll have, there'll be 9 full working sessions across early October to the end of March 2025, and that there will be some learning actions like the learning logs that Charlie mentioned, like being able to transfer some of these knowledge into your organizations, and also to be able to use the mentorship programs that we have put in place, and being able to use that as a resource throughout, because the mentors are amazing. So those are the key commitments that we're asking for. Across these 9 days, 9 sessions, we're going to be both at Faircroft College based in Birmingham, but also at these sites that we've just mentioned. So there may be some travel and some overnight stays when we are further afield. And this is a program that is designed for people that are based in the West Midlands. So hopefully the travel will be relatively familiar to organise with all of our different places that we'll be coming from, and the places that we're hoping to go to. But yes, just to be really clear, this program is fully funded. It is funded by the Innovate UK schemes. And there is a pod system in which you and 2 others from your organization may be able to join us in a pod. And the deadline to apply is the 19th of September. We do also have another open day that you can come to. I know that DB has got some more information on this as we wrap up, but if you wanted to stay behind and ask some of these questions, then by all means, you're more than welcome to. Would love to take any questions, and I'm really sorry that we went over time slightly. But yeah, DB, if you can share those, and then I'll put the questions in the chat.
Yeah, so just to say, you can find us next week Thursday, at this Material Matters Market Day, and we'll have a space where you can come and talk to us a little bit more about the program, or if there are people that you know who you think this could benefit, you can invite them along to this day. It's at our Civic Square site, which is in Ladywood, and the address is there on the screen. But some of the things that will be happening there'll be more conversations about the future of kind of construction and skills, and also there'll be suppliers of materials that are like bio-based materials for construction, and different vendors who have market stalls there. And you'll be able to hear from also some people who have been on a learning journey that we recently ran called Material Matters, and see what they've been able to action based on going on this sort of transformational learning experience that we've hosted along with Material Cultures. And like all of us in this call will be there in person. I think, yeah, all of us will be around, so you can come and find us and chat to us. And of course, like because this is a new group of people that we've never like worked with before, particularly in the construction sector, we welcome anyone to share what you've heard about this program, or make recommendations of people that we should contact, so we can spread the word, as we have a short turnaround time in terms of people making applications. So yeah, that's I think all we have to share. The questions that we have, we can share again. Matt, you've asked the application deadline at 19th of September, which is a Thursday. So yeah, and yeah, I was just going to say, because we haven't had time for the kind of Q&A, we're happy to hold space for any questions in the chat that you might have for a few minutes, but to honor the time, we'll like to just close off the session formally here. I'll stop the recording and just say thank you for joining us, and we hope that you can, as you say, share this with people that you think might be interested, and maybe we can talk more after this. So thank you.
Thank you. One question in the DM, thank you for asking, is that the purpose of joining as a maximum of 3 people from your organization is that we recognize that in programs like this, it's often hard for one person to do the entire commitment, or it's not necessarily right for one person to be doing everything. It might be more appropriate that you want certain people to go on site visits, because that will really help explore their imagination. And then there's other people who might really want to be in the classroom, or you want to do a bit of both. And as long as you can self-organize the sharing of the learning amongst the things that you miss, and completing the learning log and doing the action plan together, we want to make it more accessible to enterprises and organizations who might find it hard or overwhelming or difficult for it to be commitment to all of those days, or the majority of those days, or where it just doesn't make sense for it only to be one person, that it makes sense for a couple of people to or more, up to 3, maybe even 4, to be able to experience that in different ways. So just talk to us about it, and where you're sharing it in your networks, please feel free to communicate that to others as well, that they can talk to us about how it might be best for their organization to join a journey like this. Thank you.
Yeah. And also hopefully that will help like translate some of these learnings more wider than just one person within an organization. that was the thinking behind that.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Matt.